You ever look at someone and think, they're fine? They laugh. They work. They show up. But what you don't see is how tightly they're holding themselves together just to make it through the day. Because some people don't scream when they're drowning, they smile. They don't ask for help. Not because they don't need it, but because they've already learned what happens when they do. You've learned. You've reached out before and got silence. Or worse, judgment. You've cracked open your heart in front of someone who didn't know what to do with it. And so now, you keep it all in. Because it's safer. Because at least in silence, no one can twist your pain into a weapon. So you've made peace with pretending. You've become the strong one, the resilient one, the one who always has it together. But no one knows what it's costing you. They don't see the breakdowns behind closed doors. They don't see the nights you cry quietly into your pillow because the weight inside you doesn't have a name anymore, it's just there, always. You've trained yourself to hold it in. To breathe through the ache. To keep the mask on, even when your soul is gasping for air. And I know. You think that makes you weak. But it doesn't. It means you've been hurt deeply. And that hurt taught you to armor up. You didn't become quiet because you stopped feeling. You became quiet because you felt too much. You became quiet because being open cost you more than anyone knew. But here's the truth no one told you. Silence might protect your wounds. But it doesn't heal them. And there comes a point when holding it in starts to hold you back. You start to forget what it feels like to feel safe. To be seen. To be understood without having to explain every piece of your pain. You don't have to spill everything. You don't owe your truth to everyone. But you do owe yourself a chance at release. You do deserve spaces where your silence isn't mistaken for strength, but honored as a story waiting to be heard. Because the quietest people, they don't carry less. They just carry it alone. And maybe it's time. You didn't have to. You didn't ask for this weight. You didn't choose to be the one who had to hold it all together while everything around you kept falling apart. But when life stops asking and starts demanding, you do what you have to do. Not because you're fearless, but because falling apart simply wasn't an option. You learned how to stay calm when your world wasn't. You became the one others leaned on even when your own legs were shaking beneath you. Because someone had to be strong. Someone had to get up. And no one else did. So it became you. You stopped waiting for someone to rescue you. You stopped hoping someone would notice the exhaustion behind your smile. And instead, you became your own safety. You swallowed your pain quietly. You showed up, not because you had it all figured out, but because survival didn't care whether you were ready or not. And the truth is, strength didn't grow from comfort. It grew from necessity. It was built in the moments when you cried alone and wiped your own tears because no one else was coming. In the days you held your breath, bit your tongue, and carried the burden without complaint, not because it was easy, but because that's what the moment demanded. People see your strength now. They admire it. They call you resilient. They celebrate how well you're doing. But what they don't see is the fatigue. The silent battles. The cost. They don't see how many times you've wanted to fall apart but didn't have the space. They don't see the nights you prayed for someone to help carry the weight. And they don't understand that strength, for you, was never a badge, it was a shield. A survival mechanism that became your identity. But underneath that shield is still a human being. Still someone who needs rest. Still someone who deserves softness, even after everything they've endured. You've done what most people couldn't. You kept going when there was nothing left to give. You stayed standing when it would have been easier to collapse. Not because you wanted to be strong, but because life left you no other option. So if you're tired now, if you feel like the world keeps asking for more of you than you have left, it makes sense. Because the strength people see was built on pain they never will. And maybe now, for the first time, you don't have to prove anything anymore. Maybe now, you get to rest not because you're weak, but because you've earned it. You stopped opening up. Not because you don't feel deeply, but because you've bled in front of people who didn't know how to treat open wounds. And maybe they didn't say it out loud, but you felt it. That shift in their energy when you let them see the parts of you that weren't polished, weren't okay, weren't strong. You've sat across from people who asked how you were, but didn't mean it. You've tried to explain your hurt to someone who only nodded, only judged, only waited to twist your pain into something they could use later. And it changes you. It teaches you to protect what still hurts, to shrink your honesty, to armor up not out of pride, but out of necessity. Because somewhere along the way, you realized, not everyone is worthy of your truth. Not everyone deserves access to the version of you that's still healing. Your silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's you finally realizing that your story isn't meant for careless ears. You've carried pain that most people couldn't even comprehend. You've buried things you never got the chance to process out loud. And still, you wake up every day and try again. With that same cracked heart, with that same quiet strength, with that same resilience that no one sees. You're not cold. You're not distant. You're just done handing your scars to people who treat them like conversation starters. Because pain isn't entertainment. It's not small talk. It's sacred. And if the world has made you feel like you're too much or too heavy, that says more about them than it ever did about you. The truth is, you learned to carry your own weight because it was safer than handing it to someone else. You learned to process in silence because your peace matters more than someone else's reaction. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's growth. Maybe, finally, you're giving your pain the one thing it's always deserved. Respect. You've stopped seeking permission to feel. You've stopped begging to be heard in rooms where your voice was never valued. Because now, you understand something you didn't before. Your hurt is not for public consumption. It's not proof. It's not performance. It's yours. And the moment you stop offering it to the wrong people, you begin healing in the right way. There are seasons where you vanish. Not from the world, but from the version of yourself that everyone expects to see. You stop explaining. You stop justifying the heaviness in your chest, the quiet in your voice, the tired behind your eyes. Because healing, real healing, it doesn't ask for an audience. You don't always want to talk about what broke you. You're not looking for applause for trying to piece yourself back together. You're just trying to breathe. Trying to exist. Trying to survive the parts of yourself that no one else sees. And that's sacred. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream, it whispers. It hides behind routines. It curls up in the silence after midnight. It sits with you in the spaces where you feel most alone, reminding you of what you lost, what changed, what will never be the same again. But there's also a kind of healing that comes from being with that pain. Not fighting it, not escaping it, but sitting in it. Letting it teach you. Letting it soften you. Letting it pull you closer to something higher, something deeper, something divine. You've had moments where no one checked in. Where you cried so quietly the walls didn't even echo. Where you pretended everything was fine while your soul felt like it was crumbling in your hands. But you stayed. You didn't run. You didn't numb it away. You gave your pain the one thing it needed: presence. Not attention. Presence. You faced the shadows. You sat with God in the middle of your breaking. And even though no one saw the transformation happening, it happened. Piece by piece. Tear by tear. You've been rebuilding in the dark. Not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. This isn't weakness. This is what strength looks like when it's stripped of ego. When it's raw. When it's real. So if you're healing quietly, if you're growing in silence, if you're falling apart and rebuilding without saying a word, don't doubt that something powerful is happening inside you. Not all miracles make noise. Some just return you to yourself. You could be bleeding in a room full of people and still feel unseen. Because unless your pain is loud, packaged, and palatable, they don't know what to do with it. If you cry on a stage, if you dress your pain in eloquence and timing, if you turn your scars into a story they can clap for, they'll call you strong. They'll call you inspiring. But if you break down in your car, if you stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. wondering how much longer you can hold it together, if you stop smiling long enough for your truth to slip through, suddenly you're too much. Too sensitive. Too messy. The world celebrates the performance of survival, not the survival itself. And that's where it starts to hurt differently. You look around, wondering if you're only valuable when you pretend. When you hold yourself together just enough for others to feel comfortable around your chaos. Because the moment you stop pretending, you disappear. They don't see the days you wake up feeling heavy and still show up. They don't see the inner battles you win in silence. They don't see the strength it takes to not fall apart in public just because you're tired of being labeled. But you've never needed an audience. What you needed was peace. You needed space to feel without being judged. To unravel without being dissected. To be human without being told you're broken. And I know how exhausting it is. To carry your pain quietly. To watch others get praised for a version of strength that doesn't reflect your reality. But that doesn't make your survival any less valid. You are not invisible. Not to the parts of you that are fighting to keep going. Not to the quiet victories you've had behind closed doors. Not to the you that shows up even when no one's watching. Let them keep clapping for the performances. Let them cheer for the speeches and the polished scars. You keep choosing peace over applause. Because you've lived the kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to be real. And the truth is, the loudest strength isn't always the most honest. Sometimes, the real warriors are the ones who no longer need the world to validate their healing. There's a kind of tired that sleep doesn't touch. It lives in your chest, where you've carried too much for too long. You weren't born the strong one. You became it, because someone had to. Somewhere along the way, you learned how to hold it together. How to keep your voice steady when your heart was breaking. How to make others feel safe even when you didn't feel safe in your own skin. They leaned on you. Trusted you. Needed you. And you gave them what you never got. Again and again. At first, it felt like love. Like purpose. But slowly, it started to feel like pressure. Like responsibility wrapped in silence. Like being seen for what you do, not for what you feel. You stopped falling apart in front of people. You stopped saying, "I'm not okay." Not because you didn't feel it, but because you didn't feel allowed to. You wore strength like armor, not because you wanted to be untouchable, but because you were tired of being left unprotected. You became the anchor, the one everyone turns to. And in that role, you forgot what it felt like to be held, to be checked on, to be seen as someone who needs softness, not just someone who gives it. But you're not made of stone. And the world doesn't pause just because you're tired. So you learn to keep going, to give from an empty cup, to breathe through burnout, and pretend that you're fine, because being needed started to feel more important than being known. But deep down, you miss being someone's safe space. You miss being able to fall apart without guilt. You miss being able to say, "Can someone else be strong for a minute?" And maybe that's the real wound. You forgot that you deserve what you give. Not just the admiration for being resilient, but the care, the softness, the space to just be. You're not weak for wanting rest. You're not selfish for craving a moment where you don't have to fix anything. You're human. And even the strongest humans bleed quietly behind closed doors. So here's what I'll say. You've done more than most would survive. But it's okay to put it down now. It's okay to not carry it all. You're allowed to be held. Because being strong was never supposed to mean being alone. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't wait for silence. It lives in the middle of the noise, in rooms full of people, behind polite smiles and passing conversations. You laugh, you nod, you play your part. But inside, it feels like no one really sees you. Not the parts that ache. Not the weight you carry behind your eyes. You've been in spaces that were full, and still felt empty. Because it's not the number of people around you that matters. It's whether anyone knows how your heart actually feels. And most of the time, they don't. They see the version of you that functions. The version that's good at making others feel comfortable. But the parts of you that are breaking quietly? They get buried. So you sit in crowds, but feel like a ghost. You answer messages, but no one's really asking how you are, not in the way that means, "Tell me the truth. I can handle it." You start to shrink, not physically, but emotionally. Folding yourself up in pieces, convincing yourself your pain is too heavy to share. And that's the part no one talks about. How connection isn't about presence, it's about understanding. And when no one understands, even the most familiar faces feel distant. But here's what I've come to realize. That pain you feel in the quiet corners of connection, it's not a flaw in you. It's a reflection of how deeply you need to be seen. How deeply you long for real, not surface, not performance, but soul-deep connection. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not too much for wanting more than shallow conversations. You're not broken for craving something that meets you where you actually live. Not just where you pretend to be okay. Loneliness doesn't mean you've failed at relationships. It means you've outgrown pretending. It means your soul is asking for something real. So don't silence that voice inside. It's not weakness. It's the clearest sign that you're ready to stop shrinking just to be accepted. You're ready to be seen fully, honestly. Even if it means letting go of the people who only ever knew the mask. Because the deepest loneliness isn't being alone. It's being unseen in a room full of people who never really looked. There's a version of you the world sees, and then there's you. And somewhere along the way, you stopped knowing the difference. You put on the smile because it kept people comfortable. You kept your voice steady so no one would ask questions. You showed up, not as yourself, but as who they needed you to be. And at first, it was just survival. You weren't trying to lie. You were just trying to hold it together. But the longer you wore that mask, the more it started to fit. The more convincing it became. Until eventually, it wasn't just a cover. It became your identity. You laughed even when something inside you was falling apart. You said "I'm fine" so often, you forgot what not fine even looked like. And slowly, the line between your truth and your performance started to blur. That's the danger of pretending. It doesn't just fool others. It fools you. And after enough time, you wake up and realize you've been playing a role for so long, you don't even know who's beneath it anymore. But here's the part that's hardest to admit. Pretending doesn't heal you. It just buries the wound deeper. It makes your pain more invisible, your needs easier to dismiss, even by yourself. And when you finally try to be real, it feels foreign, even wrong. Like you're betraying the image you worked so hard to protect. But you weren't born to perform your way through life. You weren't made to be the polished version of pain. You were meant to feel, to break, to question, to be human, even if that's messy. And maybe the mask was necessary once. Maybe it helped you survive places that couldn't handle your truth. But you're not in those places anymore. And the real you, the one behind the mask, is still here. Still breathing. Still waiting. It's not weakness to take it off. It's courage. Because the moment it cracks is the moment you begin to remember. You were never the act. You were always the person underneath. Just waiting to be seen. There's a certain kind of ache that comes from being misunderstood. From showing up as your full self and being met with silence. Or worse, judgment. You start wondering if maybe you are too much. Too sensitive. Too deep. Too intense. You replay moments where you spoke from your heart, only to feel the air shift, the energy pull away, the conversation turn cold. And that silence? It doesn't just feel like rejection. It feels like shame. So you start shrinking. You dull your voice. You water yourself down, not because you want to, but because you're tired of the sting that follows being real. You think, if I could just be a little less. Maybe they'll stay. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe I'll finally fit. But fitting comes at a cost. And that cost is you. See, maybe the problem was never that you were too much. Maybe the room was just too small. Maybe the people you were trying to reach were never meant to hold someone like you. Someone who feels deeply. Thinks loudly. Sees through things. Someone who doesn't just live on the surface, but dives into everything with their whole soul. It's easier for the world to accept what it can label, contain, and predict. But what it can't understand, it often tries to quiet. And you were never made to be quiet. You were made to feel. To express. To care in a way that might scare people who've numbed themselves just to get through the day. But that doesn't make you wrong. It makes you alive. And yes, you will be misunderstood. There will be people who label your fire as too much, your softness as weak, your clarity as arrogance. Let them. Because your job was never to make yourself smaller just to be palatable. Your job was to be you fully. Freely. Unapologetically. Not for their comfort, but for your own peace. There's nothing wrong with you for being complex. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling everything so deeply. There's nothing wrong with the way your soul shows up in this world. Being misunderstood doesn't mean you need to change. It means you need to keep going. Until you find the spaces that see you. And don't flinch. Sometimes, the hardest pain to carry is the one no one sees. You're not crying in the corner. You're not falling apart in front of everyone. You're not shouting or begging for someone to notice. You're functioning. You're showing up. You're holding it together in public while slowly unraveling in private. But the truth is, you've been hurting. Just quietly. Silently. In places no one ever checks. And somehow, that silence made you start questioning your own pain. Like if it doesn't scream, it doesn't count. If it doesn't make a scene, it isn't real. If you're still standing, then maybe you don't deserve help. That belief didn't come from nowhere. You were taught over time that only the visible wounds get treated. That only breakdowns get attention. That only when you collapse, do people start asking if you're okay. So you wait. You wait until it gets bad enough. Until it's undeniable. Until you've run out of strength, and even then, you hesitate to ask for care. Because deep down, you're scared it won't be taken seriously. Because deep down, you've learned that quiet suffering gets dismissed. But listen to me, you don't have to bleed to be worthy of care. You don't have to fall apart for someone to show up. You don't have to reach your breaking point to deserve love, support, or rest. Pain doesn't need to perform to be real. It doesn't have to be loud to matter. It can sit silently in your chest for months. It can show up in the way your smile fades quicker. In the way your eyes lose light. In the way your energy disappears behind forced laughter and polite replies. That is real pain. That is real exhaustion. And it deserves just as much compassion as any visible breakdown. You are allowed to speak up even if your voice doesn't shake. You are allowed to need help even if you haven't collapsed. You are allowed to ask for softness even if you don't have the words to explain why you feel so heavy. Because the truth is, you were never meant to carry everything alone, in silence, waiting for your pain to become big enough to earn attention. You were always worthy. Even in your quietest struggle. Even when no one noticed. Even when you convinced yourself you were fine. You never had to prove your pain to be worthy of care. There's a certain kind of strength that's born out of necessity, not choice. The kind you had to build when there was no one else. When you looked around for a hand to hold and found only your own. So you wiped your tears. Bit your tongue. And kept going. Not because it was easy. But because it was the only option. You became the strong one. The steady one. The one who doesn't break. And maybe people even admired it, your resilience, your calm, your ability to hold others up. But no one ever stopped to ask what it was costing you. They saw the strength. But not the silence behind it. Not the nights you needed someone to sit with you in the dark. Not the moments you wanted to be held instead of holding everything together. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that your strength was only valuable if it was quiet. If it didn't make demands. If it didn't ask for help. If it kept showing up, no matter how tired it was. But that version of strength, it's lonely. It leaves you walking through storms with soaked clothes and a brave face, because you thought that's what strength looked like. No weakness. No needs. No breaks. But let me tell you something you may have forgotten. You were never meant to carry it all by yourself. Real strength isn't isolation. It's knowing when you've reached your limit and having the courage to say, I need someone too. It's not weakness to crave softness. It's not weakness to want to feel held, not just by your own willpower, but by someone who sees you beyond the role you've played. You deserve a place to rest. You deserve support that doesn't require you to fall apart first. You deserve to be strong, without being alone. And just because you've done it on your own before, doesn't mean you always have to. You're allowed to let the armor go. You're allowed to be human here. You're allowed to let someone in, not because you can't do it alone, but because you shouldn't have to anymore. Strength brought you this far. But connection will carry you the rest of the way. Let someone see the strong one, and stay anyway. There was a time you thought the silence was a punishment. When everything went quiet, and the people you loved drifted. When the noise faded, the plans paused, and all that was left was you, sitting in a room with nothing but your thoughts, and the ache that wouldn't go away. You wondered what you did wrong. Why life suddenly felt so hollow. Why your phone stopped ringing. Why the world kept moving, without you. And in that stillness, something broke. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a slow, invisible fracture. The kind you don't notice until the weight you've carried starts sinking deeper into your chest. But here's what you didn't realize at the time. That solitude wasn't a punishment. It was preparation. You weren't being abandoned. You were being pulled inward. Not to disappear, but to return to yourself. Because somewhere in the chaos of being everything for everyone, you forgot what your own voice sounded like. You forgot what you needed. What made your soul feel alive without performance? What peace felt like when it wasn't dependent on someone else staying? In the silence, you met parts of yourself you never knew existed. You faced the darkness not to escape it, but to understand it. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, you started to realize that the light you were chasing in everyone else, it was inside you all along. That kind of realization doesn't come when you're surrounded. It comes in the quiet. When you're stripped down to the truth of who you are, without the roles, the masks, the noise. That's where sacredness is born. Because there are some awakenings the world doesn't witness. Moments of healing no one claps for. Transformations that happen without a spotlight. And that's okay. Because when the time comes, you won't rise to prove anything. You won't need applause. You won't even need to be seen. You'll walk with a calm that doesn't need explanation. You'll carry a power that wasn't borrowed, it was earned. And the world may never know what it took for you to become this version of yourself. But you will. And that knowing? That's sacred.